guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be making another dragon art doll. Now, I haven't made a dragon in a while, so I'm just going to have fun with this piece, so I'm not really sure what I'm going to call it. But in today's video, I'm going to be trying out a new Arteza product. These are called heat transfer vinyls, and I got these glittery ones, so I'm going to try these out when we make our dragon. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so for this project, I'm going to start on the sewing first, and then we'll move on to the clay pieces. So I made a pretty simple pattern. This isn't a dragon that's going to have wings or anything, it's just a very long body style for a dragon. And the reason I have the pattern broken up on the neck and there's a spot for the tail is because I'm going to be doing fur fabric there in different colors, and then the main body is just going to be a very short plush fabric. Now, I'm really excited to try these out because these could add a ton of extra detail to my pieces. These are heat transfer vinyls, and I decided to go with a glittery kind, but you can get, I believe, metallic and then just a flat color. So with this pack, you get 16 vinyl sheets. There are a bunch of different colors in this pack. A few of them repeat, but not all of them. And pretty much these are iron-on, so you're going to basically cut out your pattern, lay it out on your fabric, and then you would take an iron and you would melt it onto the fabric. So I'm going to pick out my colors to match the fur fabric that I want to use for the dragon. So I'm going to go with a blue, a purple, and the closest thing to a pink that I can find. So once I have my colors picked out, I'm going to take my fabric pieces for the sides of the dragon. I figured these would be the easiest to iron onto, and they're just a short plush green fabric, and I'm going to iron on my patterns. So I cut everything out the way I want it. I'm trying to have the colors fade to match the pattern of the fur fabric that I'm going to add later. So the vinyls were pretty easy to cut out. They're not super thick, but they are still kind of rubbery because they do have a film on the back that you peel off later. So I got everything laid out. I just did a few random lines and twirls, and I'm trying to have the pattern go along with how I'm going to do the fur on the body. So I want it to fade from pink to purple to blue, and that's how I'm going to do the fur later. So I'm going to lay that down, I'm going to let my iron heat up, and then I'm going to go over everything. Now it does say to cover this up with a protective layer like wax paper, but it was sticking to my iron, so I decided to just go straight onto the vinyls, and it didn't have any issues. Now the only issues I really had with this was I should have let my iron get hotter because I was a little nervous and I didn't want to melt them. I wasn't sure if they'd melt or anything, so I didn't get my iron hot enough to do them at first, so they weren't completely sealed to the fabric and I had to go over them again. So again, make sure your iron is hot enough when you're doing this and you're doing it long enough. But other than that, they were super easy. You basically have to lay them down with the matte side touching the fabric and then the glossy side up. And the glossy side is basically a plastic film that you'll peel off after you iron everything on. And I really like how glittery they are. They're not just as simple, here's a bit of a sparkle. They're completely covered in glitter and they're wonderful. And it's the type of glitter that doesn't come off. Like, you know how you buy something that's glittery and it sheds glitter? This isn't like that. Anyways, I got those ironed on and I let them cool, and now I need to start working on the other sewing. So I'm going to get all the fur fabric pieces that we're going to use. I have pieces that are going to go around the neck and the end of the tail, and then there's a strip that's going to go down the back of the dragon. So I have my fur fabric laid out. I have it fading from pink to purple to blue, just like the glittery vinyls. After that, I'm going to take that blue long strip of fur fabric that's going to go down the back of the dragon, and I'm going to add some spikes that I made to it. So I'm going to take my strip of fur fabric and I'm going to cut some tiny holes for all the horns to go through. I'm going to have them evenly spaced throughout the length of the fur fabric. This of course is going to have to dry a bit, but once that's dried, I'm going to take the fur pieces for the head and the tail and I'm going to connect them to each end. Once we have all the fur fabric pieces connected, I'm then going to take the sides of the dragon that we ironed earlier. So I'm going to be sewing the sides onto each side of that strip of fur fabric. So one is going to be on one side and one is going to be on the other, and we're going to connect all of our fabric for the body. Once that's done, you're going to have something that looks like this. Kind of looks like a really weird sock. Okay, so that is all the sewing that we can do for now. We'll have to do some more when we put everything together, but right now we need to make our clay pieces. Okay, so I'm going to start on the clay head first, and then we'll move on to making all 4 of the clay feet. So for this, I'm going to need some tin foil for the base. I'm going to make kind of a rough shape of a cone, and I'm going to start completely covering this in a nice thick layer of clay. Once I have my clay laid out, I'm then going to blend everything together and start adjusting the shape of the head. Now, because we're using a lot of really bright, fun colors, I'm going to go kind of soft and more gentle-like in style with the clay pieces. So I don't want anything super aggressive looking. I want the face to be very kind and soft. So once I have a basic shape laid down, I need to figure out where the horns are going to go. Now these, I don't really feel comfortable baking such a thick piece of resin. Honestly, they're probably fine, but just to be safe, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark out where I need the horns to be connected. So I'm going to take them, I'm going to push them into the clay, make sure they're completely marked out so there's a nice indent, and then I'm going to pop them off. So we're going to actually add these later once everything is painted and resined and stuff like that. So I figured out where I want my horns. I'm going to use my tools to kind of clean up those edges a little bit so they're really easy to pop the horns back into place once we're done. Now while I'm sculpting the face, I am going to leave the horns in place, but again, they are going to be removed before we bake the head. So I'm going to kind of add a little bit of texture around the bases of the horns, and then I'm going to figure out where I want the eyes to go. Once I decide where I want the eyes to go, I'm going to take some balls of clay, make sure they're nice and even. You don't want them to be different sizes. And I'm just going to push them into the face on the sides of the face where I want the eyes to go. So I'm going to lay those out, and then I'm going to take some strips of clay to make the bottom eyelid and the top eyelid. Once I have those positioned, I'm going to blend the eyelids into the face and use my tools to straighten it to correct the shape of the eye. That way I can get the expression that I want the eyes to have, which again is going to be kind of soft and friendly. After that, I'm going to continue the texture that we have around the base of the horns down the front of the face. So I want just some very soft scale marks. And then I'm going to take my tools and I'm going to mark out the other features of the face. So we need to figure out where the mouth is going to go and the nose. For the nose, I'm just going to indent where I want the nostrils to be and then kind of use my fingers and my tools to reshape them until I like how it looks. For the mouth, I'm going to sketch out the shape of where the mouth is going to go. So I just want a rough example, but I want to make sure that it's even on both sides. So I'm going to make sure that I have the basic sketch nice and even, and then I'm going to start digging in and refining the shape of it. After that, I realized that I wanted to have some of the fur fabric come onto the face a bit more, so kind of around where the cheeks are, I'm going to scrape away a nice little pocket for where we can glue fur fabric. So I just kind of want that fur to be a little bit more forward and to shape the face instead of having a straight line separating the face from the body. So I'm going to scrape away some clay on both sides of the face and just kind of clean up that line. And then after that, I'm going to start adding some texture to the face. So I'm going to use my tools and just kind of rough up the skin a bit. That way it has a bit of a scaly texture to it, but it's not super like bumpy or anything. I also want to break up the lips into more defined scales, so I'm going to add some line work there, and then I'm going to start adding some texture to the throat. Lastly, more on his cheeks, kind of the lower portion, I'm going to start adding some spikes. So I'm just going to roll out some balls of clay, kind of cone them off a little bit, and place them on the face. And then once I was happy with how the clay head looks, it's got all the texture and everything that I want, I'm going to put it in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 minutes. Now again, unless you're comfortable with baking the horns, make sure you pop them out of place and put them off to the side. Okay, so now we're going to work on the clay feet while our head is baking. So for these, I have a very simple wireframe set up for all of them. They're a little bit different for the front ones versus the back ones. I made the toes for the back feet just a little bit longer. But other than that, they're pretty much the same. So I'm going to start by adding some claws to the ends of the wires for each toe. So I'm just going to take a ball of clay, going to pinch it onto the end of that wire and then shape it until it's kind of pointed. I'm also going to take a larger ball of clay and I'm going to use that to cover up the portion of the wire frame where all the wires are combined. This is just going to help everything hold together a little bit more when we add more clay to the wire frame. So once we have that in place, I'm going to do a pre-bake. Not very long, we're just going to put them in the oven for about 20 minutes at our same 275 Fahrenheit temperature. Once those are out of the oven and have cooled to touch, we can then start sculpting the bottoms of the feet and the back of the foot. For this, I'm just going to take some strips of clay. They're cut to the length of each toe wire, and I'm just going to push them onto the bottom portion of the toe. I'm going to push them into place and kind of pinch them around the wire a little bit so they're holding onto it, and then I can add any wrinkles or texture that I want on the bottoms of the feet. I'm also blending them into the base of the foot and adding a little bit of clay to the back of the foot as well, and we're just going to make sure everything is blended together, and again, whatever texture you want, make sure to add that. And then we're going to put our clay feet in the oven for another bake, this time probably about 30 minutes at the same 275 Fahrenheit temperature. And then once those are out of the oven again, we can start sculpting the tops of the feet. For the tops of the feet, I'm going to leave them pretty simple. I'm just going to be doing layered scales. So for this, I'm going to take some balls of clay. They're roughly all about the same size, and I'm going to start layering them up the toes. And once I get to the base of the foot, I'm going to take some larger pieces of clay and I'm going to start layering those up the rest of the foot. If you want, you can take some of your tools, straighten up any lines, add a texture, whatever you want, and then once you're happy with how the foot looks, we're going to do our final bake. This is going to be a 45-minute bake at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once all of our clay pieces are out of the oven and have cooled to touch, we can start painting them. So I'm going to be doing the painting for the head first, and I'm leaving the horns off because I don't want to get any paint on them. So those are going to be added after we're done painting. So the main body of our dragon is green, so I'm going to be painting and primering all of our clay pieces a green. So you might have to go over it a few times to get a solid color, but once you have a nice base to work on, we can then start adding our details on top of that. So what I want to do is I want to add a shadowing to this. So I'm going to take some black paint, I'm going to go over the spots where I want to have a bit of a shadow. This is going to be kind of in the cracks of the scales and around the lips a little bit. I'm going to paint that real quick, and then I'm going to take a damp paper towel and wipe away any excess paint that's more on the raised portions. So I mainly just want our black paint to be in the cracks, not on anything else. Now it is okay that it did stain the color a little bit. It will darken whatever you have it go onto unless you scrub a little harder, but you kind of risk removing the other paint if you do that. So I'm going to add those shadows where I want. You can add whatever ones you want. I'm just adding them where I would like them. And then I'm going to take a semi-white paint. It's a little bit more creamy than white, and I'm going to go over the eyes. So I'm going to paint the whole surface of the eyeballs. This is going to have to dry before we add any more detail to the eyes, so I'm going to start painting some more features on the face. Now again, remember the fur that I'm going to have framing the face is going to start out pink, so because I want everything to continue fading, I think adding pink highlights and details to the face would look really nice. So like the top of the face and the spikes around the cheeks, I'm going to end up painting those pink. Now with the pink details, I'm okay with it being kind of on the darker side because I'm going to let that dry and then go over it and add a more brighter pink highlight to it. Once I have that done, I can then go back to the eyes and paint the iris and the pupil. So I kind of want the eyes to be blue. It's one of the colors that we're using on the body, but it's also one that kind of stands out a little bit more against the other colors that are on the face. So I'm going to be painting a blue iris, and then I'm going to pick out the black for the pupil and paint that in place as well. And then lastly, I'm going to add a dot of white to make it look like it has a bit of a reflectiveness to it. Now to bring out more of the features of the face, I'm going to take a brighter, more lime type green, and I'm going to start framing different features. So the eyelids, I'm going to go over with that, and I'm also going to go over the lips with it. Lastly, I'm going to take some white paint and I'm going to add a bit more of a highlight to the other highlighted areas. So everywhere that's kind of more bright, I'm going to add a little bit more brightness to it by adding some white to it. Once we're done painting the head, we're then going to move on to painting all four of the feet. So for this, I'm going to primer them with the same green that we primered the face. Remember, you'll probably have to do a few coats of this, but once that's dried, I'm then going to take the pink that we used for the highlights and details of the face, and I'm going to go over the scales on the tops of the feet and paint those solid pink. After that's dried, we can add a bit of a highlight to those scales as well, and then we're going to paint our claws black. So I'm going to do this to all four of the feet. Once all of our painting is done, it's dried, I'm then going to mix up some resin and I'm going to paint it over all of our clay surface, and this is going to help protect our paint. I'm also going to be taking that same resin and I'm going to fill those holes for the horns, and I'm going to push those horns into place. And the resin is going to just really lock those horns into place so you don't have to worry about them falling off. Now, the type of resin that I use usually takes about 24 to 48 hours to cure, so I'm going to set all of our clay pieces aside to dry and cure, and then once those are completely done, we can start putting our dragon together. Okay, so it's pretty much the next day, and we're going to start putting our dragon together. So I'm going to take that fabric body piece that we made at the beginning of the video, and we're going to add it to a wireframe. So I made a pretty simple wireframe. It's a little bit reinforced because the head's kind of heavy, but other than that, it's really basic. So I'm going to figure out where the wires for the legs need to go, and I'm going to cut some holes into the fabric body and then slide this over the wireframe. Once that's in place, we're then going to take our clay head and we're going to glue this to the wire for the neck. And then once that's in place, we can then take the fabric for the neck, that fur trimming, and we can start gluing that around the base of the head. And this is one of those rare occasions where my fur fabric reaches all the way around the base of the head, so I'm really happy about that. After that, those little empty spots that I wanted to add fur fabric, I'm going to cut some pieces to fit and glue those into place as well. I'm going to let our glue dry a little bit, and then we're going to start closing up the body. So I'm going to start sewing from the base of the neck and then go all the way down the body, and as I'm going, I'm stuffing the body. So I'm going to be sewing and stuffing the body all the way until we get to the very end of the tail. Once the body is done, we can start adding the legs. So I'm going to take the fabric pieces that we have for the legs, and I'm going to pin those together. Each leg has an inside portion and an outside portion, and we're going to be using our sewing machine to sew the fronts of all the legs together. After we have the leg fabric sewn, we can then add them to the body. Now, I do have a very faint line kind of drawn on the fabric body where we're going to sew, so I'm going to follow those lines as I'm sewing the legs into place. So we're going to get the fabric for all the legs in place, and then we're going to take our clay legs and we're going to add those to the wires for the legs. So I'm going to cut the wires for the legs to fit to make sure they're the correct length. I always make them a little bit longer just in case, and then I'm going to take a thinner gauge wire and start wrapping them onto the wireframe. Once our clay legs are in place, I'm then going to take the fabric for the legs and I'm going to glue those around the bases of our clay legs. That, of course, is going to have to dry a little bit, but once it's dried, we can then stuff and close up all of our legs. Lastly, the fur on the back of the dragon, the little strip that's running along with the spikes, it's a little too fluffy and it's kind of hard to see the spikes, so I'm just going to take a hair trimmer and kind of shave up the sides a little bit so you can see all the spikes that we added. Okay guys, and that's how I made a dragon art doll. I just wanted to have fun with this project, so I didn't really give it a theme or anything. I just kind of picked the colors and went with it. So I hope you guys liked it. I know I had a lot of fun trying out the glittery vinyls from Arteza. They were actually really easy to use. I enjoyed them quite a bit, and I can't wait to mess around and see if I can get some really complicated patterns going with them. Anyways, I'm going to have this dragon in my Etsy shop along with a bunch of other creatures, so if anyone's interested in buying anything, just check the links down below. I also have a coupon code for you guys if you want to buy anything from Arteza. That'll be in the description as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!